my usual fare for fish days. This is actually a restaurant that we go to, my research team and I go to.
Fish 101?
Fish 101. It's in Encinitas.
Where is it at?
Encinitas,
Oh.
right on, 101. It's a great place. I highly recommend it. It's really nice people that run it. Okay, careful down there. All right, so continuing on, we talked a bit about various characteristics of fishes, right? Last time we kind of went into a lot of that. And we were talking a bit about various ways that they can hide or escape predation. Okay? And obviously camouflage is a big one for a lot of fishes. And different coloration patterns can provide different types of camouflage. So we talked a bit about some that blend in really well with their environment, some that use disruptive type coloration where they're perhaps they have spots in different places that look like eyes, or they have stripes that kind of confuses a predator. And then there are some that can actually puff up, which we talked about with our little friend over there. Okay, so by taking on water, they can really rapidly increase their body size and make it obviously be kind of hard for a predator to swallow something like that. And usually these types of fish are spiny too. So on top of being suddenly really large and round and hard, they're also covered in spines. So not so desirable to swallow, depending on the gait of the fish. Not good. And flying. Do they actually fly, flapping their wings? No, but they can glide certainly through the air. Out of the water, okay, which can help to avoid a predator. And I think I told you about a friend of mine who was hit in the chest with one, right? Yeah. A California flying fish. He was okay, but fortunately it didn't hit him up here. That could have knocked him out.
How far do they glide?
I don't know like max distance, but I've seen them do it, and they'll certainly go maybe 20, 30 feet or so. They can go pretty far, yeah. So, if they get enough, power going up. Sometimes I'm sure it's shorter than that, but it can be quite a bit. I mean, you have to imagine, like, this friend was standing in a whaler boat, console whaler. So, and he's about 6'2" or something. So, like, even just that height, like, that's pretty high up. And then we talked about the lovely pearlfish, which camouflage themselves or hide out, hanging out in the anus of a sea cucumber. And I think this was brought up in the boat sea cucumbers too. This lovely symbiotic relationship. It's kind of strange, but it works for them. Okay. There are other fishes that do things like creating a little cocoon or some kind of area around them, particularly at night. So there are a lot of parrotfishes that secrete mucus around themselves and create like a little cocoon. So it just gives them enough protection. It's not as though they're, I mean, obviously you can see this fish, right? Usually they're tucked kind of underneath rocks and then surround themselves with this. So I think this type of protection is twofold. One, I think it helps for avoiding some of the chemosensory. I think it's probably harder for a nighttime predator who's often using chemosensory ability as opposed to necessarily visual cues to find predators. So I'm guessing it detracts from that a bit. I can't smell them as easily. And then there are probably some that might actually nibble at this mucus but not actually go after the fish. And probably gain some nutrition from that. Of course, a lot of fish have spines, okay, or some other bony plates or hard parts on their body that make them less desirable to go after for a predator. Things like surgeonfish, a lot of the rays, the critters have spines. Some venomous, some not. but either way, it still makes them more difficult to eat. And a lot of times they'll have fins that will where they can erect all their fins, some of which will have spines in them. So not only are they spiny and ouchy, but they've made themselves bigger by doing that too, and harder to grasp. Okay, some, of course, produce some kind of toxic substance. Things like scorpion fishes and stonefishes. We have one of these guys, California scorpionfish here. So one that we'll see when we go, excuse me, when we go on the boat. And we'll probably get some of those. So that's one of the fish that usually when we take in a trawl, one of the deckhands or somebody on the boat will usually kind of go through it first to make sure. And usually they're looking for these guys, scorpion fishes, as well as different types of rays, both of which have venomous spines. So you do have to kind of handle them more carefully. I have gotten a spine, excuse me, spine from fortunately not one of the dorsal spines, it was one of the ones around the, I think it was a pelvic spine actually. So they're a little bit smaller and I think a little bit less intense, but just in my hand, and it didn't feel good. So imagine, and it was a small one, so imagine like a big one that if you really landed on it or grabbed it, it can pack a punch. It's not going to kill you, a human anyway, but it's not cute. However, things like stonefishes can actually be deadly. So depending on the species, it varies. Some of you have probably also been hearing a bit about lionfish. He says here, they're a beautiful fish that are native to South Pacific. And they have started to invade Caribbean waters and up into some of the subtropical areas around Florida, up into the Carolinas. They've started seeing them around Baja. They're highly invasive. They've kind of taken hold and they'll eat whatever, and they have nearly no predators because they're highly venomous. So it's a big problem, and there's a lot of people trying to eradicate them in different areas. They'll have like fishing tournaments for them, usually spear fishing. They kind of live on the bottom, and they're good to eat. They're meat, but you do have to make sure you know what you're doing to go around the lands that produce the toxins, so you're not consuming that as well. Which isn't super difficult to do, but I think people are sort of hesitant to do it if they haven't before. So that's another issue that we may talk about different lecture later on. We'll talk about various sort of threats to marine environments, and invasive species is a big one. So these guys will probably come up again. And then some of you may have heard of fugu. Anyone? So another highly venomous fish that is very prized for its meat, but partly because it takes sort of a talented chef that knows what they're doing to make sure that they're cutting around all the right parts. So even way more so than the lionfish, where it's just like this little gland. These have it throughout, so you really do have to know what you're doing. It's another type of puffer. And I had a friend actually joke about, so we were talking about venomous fish and stuff, and they said, "Oh, are you gonna?" And they knew that I sometimes will wear a shirt. They're like, "Oh, are you also gonna bring fugu vodka in for your class?" I don't know if you guys have ever seen. There's a brand. I think it's Ballast Point, a local thing that has a vodka brand. It's called Fugu, and it has the fish on the top. I was like, I'm sure the class would love that. It probably might get them through the lecture a little more easily, but it would probably not be appropriate for me to bring in booze. Okay, so fish reproduction. One of the things that I think is really cool about fish is that when it comes to things like reproduction and kind of lifestyles in general, they do it all. Okay? They just really run the gamut. So it's kind of fun to talk about them with some of these things because they're very flexible with respect to their reproductive strategies. Okay, so we haven't totally gotten into the taxonomy yet, but we know, well, hopefully, I'll tell you, there are groups of jawless fishes and salmon, both of which are less derived species, so they've been around longer, evolutionarily speaking. Typically, they will release gametes into the body cavity and out through abdominal pores. So a little bit different. Bony fish tend to have specialized openings behind the anus for both urinary and reproductive purposes. So they have either cloaca, so a single opening, but there are different pathways. So we did the dissections last time, and most of you guys were able to find the gonads as well as the gut. Okay, so they both end up going to the same opening, but they have sort of different tubes, but emptying out into the same opening, right? So, so they release gametes and they poop and pee out of the same hole. Okay. But they are separate systems. Often, for a lot of fishes, particularly in temperate regions like ours, reproduction is seasonal. When you get into warmer areas, there definitely are species that will spawn year-round, but usually there's some seasonal component and often a lunar component, so based on the moon. So as I mentioned, fish kind of run the spectrum of types of reproduction. So we'll talk about a couple of those. Many fish, particularly bony fish, are oviparous, or they exhibit oviparity. So ovi refers to what? Egg. Okay. So oviparity means that they're releasing eggs into a water column, okay, and there is no parental care. So they're just, the sperm and egg are released away from the body. They develop outside of the care of the mother or father. This, again, is very common in bony fishes. There are some elasmobranchs, or the cartilaginous fishes, including sharks and rays, that do this. But many of them have internal fertilization, which we'll talk about. Okay. Then there's another strategy called ovoviviparity, okay, or ovoviviparous. So this is a method of internal fertilization where the eggs develop within the uterus of the mother, but they're attached to a yolk sac that they're feeding off of. So there's little input nutritionally from the mother directly. Okay? They're feeding mostly off of the yolk sac, but they are developing within the mother's body in a uterus. So it's kind of this in-between. When they are born, they are of a stage where they're able to swim and feed on their own. Okay. And usually there's very little parental care after that. So there are a lot of sharks that do this. There are also some bony fishes like rockfish and surf perch that do this as well. Yeah.
Just wondering if you go back for one for the other side. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so this is what it would look like. They sometimes call these candles, the uterus. So what you're really seeing here are the yolk sacs. So this is, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 babies